I found this crumpled note under your pillow. What does "I can't go on like this" mean, Ben? My husband froze, his eyes wide like a deer in headlights. After 30 years of marriage, I knew every nuance of his expression. The slight twitch at the corner of his mouth, the way his brow furrowed ever so slightly, he was hiding something from me. "It's nothing, Ava, just some nonsense I scribbled down." Ben snatched the note from my hand, crumpling it further in his fist. I crossed my arms, my heart pounding. "Don't lie to me. We promised each other no more secrets, remember?" He sighed heavily, running a hand through his thinning gray hair. "You're right, I'm sorry. It's just—" He trailed off, averting his gaze. The silence stretched between us, thick with unspoken tensions. I thought of our 2 grown children, Lila and Jessie, both out on their own now. Had our family become so fractured without me realizing? "Ben, talk to me," I pleaded, my voice catching in my throat. "Whatever it is, we can work through it together." He looked up at me then, his eyes brimming with a sadness I hadn't seen in years. "I don't know if we can, Ava. I've been feeling so trapped, like I'm living someone else's life." His words felt like a physical blow. We'd built this life together, a life centered around his family's hardware store and the home we'd made for our children. How could he feel trapped in the very existence he'd chosen? "What are you saying?" I asked, my hands trembling. "Are you unhappy with me? With us?" Ben reached for me, but I stepped back, my mind reeling. "It's not about you, Ava. It's about me and the choices I've made, the dreams I've let slip away." I wanted to scream, to rage against the injustice of it all. We'd weathered so many storms together, only for him to crumble under the weight of some midlife crisis. But as I looked at my husband, truly looked at him, I saw the deep lines etched into his face, the weariness in his eyes. This was a man struggling under the burden of regrets and unfulfilled desires. In that moment, I realized our marriage had become a battlefield, with casualties on both sides. We'd been so focused on raising our children, on maintaining the status quo, that we'd lost sight of each other's needs. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. "Okay, Ben, I hear you. But we can't fix this if you don't let me in. No more secrets, remember?" He nodded slowly, his shoulders sagging with relief. "You're right. I owe you the truth." As he began to speak, I braced myself for the impact of his words, knowing that our lives were about to change forever. Ben's confession hung heavy in the air between us. I felt like I was suffocating, gasping for breath as the weight of his words threatened to crush me. "You're feeling trapped?" I echoed, my voice trembling with a mix of anger and disbelief. "What about me, Ben? Have you ever stopped to consider how I might feel, living under the same roof as your mother?" Eleanor. Just the thought of her name made my blood boil. From the moment she'd moved in after her knee surgery, she'd made my life a living hell. Her constant criticism, her blatant favoritism towards Ben, it was like she took perverse pleasure in belittling me at every turn. "Mom's just set in her ways," Ben said weakly, as if that excused her behavior. "You know how she is." I scoffed, shaking my head. "Yes, I know exactly how she is. She's a manipulative, controlling woman who has never accepted me as part of this family." Ben opened his mouth to protest, but I held up a hand, stopping him. "Don't try to defend her, Ben. Not after everything she's put me through." Memories flooded my mind, unbidden. Eleanor's snide remarks about my cooking, her disdainful looks whenever I tried to assert myself. And through it all, Ben had stood by, either oblivious or unwilling to confront his precious mother. "Do you remember our anniversary dinner last year?" I asked, my voice thick with emotion. How she criticized the way I'd set the table, made snide comments about the food I'd spent hours preparing. Ben's face fell, and I knew he remembered. It had been one of the worst nights of my life, a supposed celebration turned into a humiliating ordeal. "And what did you do?" I pressed on, the words tumbling out in a rush. "You just sat there, letting her tear me down in front of our own children." Lila and Jessie, bless them, had tried to come to my defense that night, but their efforts had only earned them Eleanor's wrath, further fracturing our already strained family dynamics. "I'm sorry, Ava," Ben said, his voice heavy with remorse. "I should have stood up for you, for all of us, but you know how my mother can be." "No, Ben," I cut him off sharply. "I don't want to hear excuses anymore. Not when you've let her walk all over me for years." I thought back to the early days of our marriage, when Ben and I had been so deliriously happy. We'd had our whole lives ahead of us, full of promise and possibility. But somewhere along the way that spark had dimmed, smothered by the weight of Eleanor's constant presence and Ben's complacency. "Do you remember our trip to Napa Valley?" I asked, a wistful smile tugging at my lips despite the pain in my heart. "We were so young and carefree, dreaming of all the adventures we'd have together." Ben's expression softened, and for a moment I saw a glimpse of the man I'd fallen in love with all those years ago. "Of course I remember. Those were some of the happiest days of my life." "What happened to us, Ben?" I whispered, my voice cracking with emotion. "Where did that happiness go?" He reached for my hand, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "I don't know, Ava, but I want to find it again, with you. I want us to be a team, like we used to be." I searched his face, desperate to believe his words, to trust that he truly meant them. But the shadow of Eleanor's influence loomed large, a constant reminder of the forces working against us. As I looked into Ben's eyes, I knew that our journey back to happiness would be long and arduous. But for the first time in years, I felt a glimmer of hope, a determination to reclaim the life and love we'd once shared, no matter what obstacles stood in our way. The weeks following Ben's confession were a whirlwind of emotion. As much as I wanted to believe his promises of change, the sting of his betrayal lingered like a persistent ache. It started with little things: a lingering glance when a woman walked by, a secretive smile as he checked his phone. At first I brushed it off, desperate to cling to the hope that we could salvage our marriage. But then came the late nights at the hardware store, the flimsy excuses about inventory checks and supplier meetings. I knew in my gut that something was amiss, but I was too afraid to confront the truth. That all changed the day Marie Wilkins walked back into our lives. I'll never forget the moment I saw her standing in our driveway, her perfectly coiffed hair and designer clothes a stark contrast to my rumpled house dress. She looked every bit the successful businesswoman she'd become, her confidence radiating like a force field. "Ava," she said, her voice dripping with false warmth. "It's been too long." I stared at her, dumbfounded. Marie had been Ben's high school sweetheart, the one he'd pined over before settling down with me. And now, after all these years, she was back in our lives like a specter from the past. "What are you doing here?" I managed to ask, my heart pounding in my chest. Marie's perfectly painted lips curved into a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I'm back in town for good, and I thought I'd stop by and say hello to an old friend." An old friend. The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Suddenly everything clicked into place. Ben's distant behavior, his late nights, the guilty looks he'd been giving me. "You've been seeing my husband?" I said, my voice trembling with a mix of anger and heartbreak. To her credit, Marie didn't try to deny it. "Ben and I have reconnected, yes, but it's not what you think, Ava. We're just old friends catching up, reminiscing about the past." I wanted to scream, to lash out at this woman who had so casually waltzed back into our lives and upended everything. But deep down, I knew the blame lay squarely on Ben's shoulders. When he finally came home that evening, I confronted him head-on. "Marie stopped by today," I said, watching as the color drained from his face. Ben opened his mouth, but I held up a hand, stopping him. "Don't bother lying to me, Ben. I know you've been seeing her behind my back." For a moment, he looked like a cornered animal, his eyes darting around the room as if searching for an escape. But then, his shoulders slumped in defeat. "You're right," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I've been meeting up with Marie, trying to recapture some of the excitement from our youth." The admission hit me like a physical blow, stealing the breath from my lungs. All this time, while I'd been trying to salvage our marriage, he'd been indulging in some twisted midlife crisis. "How could you do this to me, Ben?" I asked, my voice thick with tears. "After everything we've been through together, how could you betray me like this?" He reached for me, but I recoiled from his touch. "Ava, please let me explain." But I didn't want to hear his excuses, his justifications. In that moment, all I felt was a profound sense of betrayal, a realization that the man I'd loved and trusted for decades had been living a lie. As I looked at Ben, I saw a stranger, a man consumed by his own selfish desires, willing to sacrifice everything we'd built for a fleeting taste of his past. And in that moment, I knew that our marriage, our family, had been irrevocably shattered. The only question that remained was whether we had the strength to pick up the pieces and rebuild from the rubble. The weeks following Ben's confession were a whirlwind of emotion. As much as I wanted to believe his promises of change, the sting of betrayal lingered like a persistent ache. We tried to move forward, to rebuild the tattered remnants of our marriage, but a palpable tension hung in the air. Ben's words of reassurance felt hollow, and I found myself questioning every gesture, every glance. It all came to a head during a family dinner when Lila and Jesse joined us. I'd hoped that their presence might help bridge the growing divide between Ben and me, but little did I know it would only serve to widen the chasm. "Mom, Dad, we need to talk," Lila began, her expression a mix of concern and determination. Ben and I exchanged a glance, and I felt a flicker of hope. Perhaps this was the moment we'd find our way back to each other, to the love that had once bound us so tightly. But then Eleanor opened her mouth and everything unraveled. "Your father and I have been discussing his little indiscretion," she said, her words laced with venom. "And I, for one, think it's time he put an end to this nonsense with that woman." I felt the air leave my lungs, a sickening realization dawning. Eleanor knew about Ben's affair with Marie, and she was using it as ammunition in her never-ending quest to control our family. "Mom, stop," Ben warned, but Eleanor barreled on, her gaze fixed on me. "You've been so focused on your own hurt, Ava, that you've neglected your duties as a wife and mother." The words hit me like a physical blow, and I felt the familiar tendrils of shame and inadequacy wrapping around me. But this time, something was different. This time I had an ally. "That's enough, Grandma." Lila spoke up, her voice trembling with barely contained rage. "You have no right to speak to Mom like that." Eleanor turned on her, her eyes flashing with fury. "How dare you take her side, after everything she's done to tear this family apart?" "She's not the one who betrayed Dad," Jesse chimed in, his jaw set in a defiant line. "That was you, Grandma, and him." The words hung in the air, a damning indictment of the fractures that had formed in our once tight-knit family. I looked at Ben, silently pleading for him to take a stand, to choose us over the toxic influence of his mother. But he remained silent, his gaze fixed on the table, a myriad of emotions flickering across his face. In that moment, I knew that our marriage had reached a breaking point. The betrayal, the lies, the constant manipulation, it had all become too much to bear. And as much as I loved Ben, as much as I wanted to believe in the promises of change, I knew that we couldn't move forward until we confronted the source of our turmoil head-on. "Ben," I said, my voice trembling with a mix of sadness and resolve, "we can't go on like this. Something has to change." He looked up at me, and I saw the weight of the world in his eyes. A silent acknowledgement passed between us, a recognition that our family was fracturing, and we had to make a choice. As I looked around the table at the strained expressions on Lila and Jesse's faces, at the defiant tilt of Eleanor's chin, I knew that this was the moment that would define our future. We could either crumble under the weight of our dysfunction, or we could rise above it, reclaiming the love and strength that had once bound us together. The choice was ours to make, and in that moment, I knew that I had to be the one to take the first step. The decision to leave my home, my life as I knew it, was one of the most difficult choices I've ever had to make. But in the aftermath of Ben's betrayal, I knew that I couldn't stay trapped in that suffocating existence any longer. I had to find a way to breathe again, to reclaim some semblance of dignity. That's how I found myself taking the leap, accepting a full-time position at the community center. It was a chance to immerse myself in a new world, one where I could rediscover my sense of purpose and self-worth. The work was demanding, but it gave me a renewed sense of accomplishment that had been missing from my life for far too long. In the months that followed, I found myself becoming a part of a vibrant community of women, each of us seeking solace in the shared bonds of our newfound independence. We would gather after our shifts, sharing stories over glasses of wine, and forming a sisterhood stronger than I'd ever imagined possible. It was there, among that circle of kindred spirits, that I first felt the stirrings of a long-forgotten dream. A dream that had been buried beneath years of domestic drudgery and the relentless demands of keeping a home. A dream that had once filled me with a sense of purpose and possibility. What if, I mused aloud one evening, as my new friends listened with rapt attention. What if I finally pursued that degree I'd always longed for? The idea took root, blossoming into a plan that would allow me to reclaim a piece of the identity I'd lost. With a newfound determination, I enrolled in the local community college, taking night classes that would finally allow me to achieve the dream I'd abandoned so many years ago. Suddenly, a whole new world opened up before me, a world where I could finally put my passions to use, where I could build a life on my own terms. It was a revelation that filled me with a sense of possibility I hadn't felt in years. As the months passed, my confidence grew. I found myself thriving in my new role, embracing the challenges that came with juggling work and school. And with each accomplishment, each new milestone, I felt the shackles of my former life slip away. My new friends cheered me on, celebrating each small victory with me over glasses of wine that grew cheaper by the day. They became my tribe, a support system that buoyed me through the darkest days when the weight of it all threatened to overwhelm me. It was through their encouragement that I finally decided to take the leap and apply to the local university to complete my degree. A dream I had long since abandoned finally became a reality, and with it, a new path opened up before me. In that moment, I knew that I had reclaimed a piece of myself that had been missing for far too long. A piece that had been slowly chipped away by the demands of keeping a home, of being a provider. The possibility of what my life could become filled me with a sense of hope and possibility I hadn't felt in years. That night, as I poured myself a glass of the cheapest wine I could find, I raised a toast to my newfound independence. A new life was calling, one that was entirely my own. The weight of Eleanor's control over the family had been slowly suffocating me, but with Ava's newfound independence, I felt a sense of hope, a belief that we could forge our own path forward. That's when I knew I had to take a stand against my mother's manipulation, for the sake of my own future, and Ava's. It started with the little things, standing up to Eleanor's criticisms, asserting my own identity. And then as my confidence grew, I began to envision a life without her looming presence, without the weight of her expectations. That's when I made the decision to cut ties with Eleanor, to break free from the cycle of control that had defined our family dynamics for far too long. It was a difficult choice, but one that felt necessary for my own growth and for Ava's sense of self-determination. With a newfound sense of purpose, I took the first steps towards building a life without Eleanor's influence, paving the way for a future where Ava and I could forge our own path together. In that moment, I knew that the road ahead would be challenging, but I was ready to face it head-on with Ava by my side. It was a new beginning, a chance to redefine ourselves and our future, free from the burdens of the past. As we moved forward, I felt a sense of excitement and determination, knowing that we were building a life on our own terms, with a foundation of respect and partnership. The weeks following my confrontation with Eleanor were a whirlwind of emotion. Ben and I found ourselves navigating uncharted territory, trying to rebuild the foundations of our marriage on a bedrock of honesty and mutual respect. It wasn't easy. Years of resentment and hurt had taken their toll, leaving deep scars that would take time to heal. But for the first time in a long while, I felt a glimmer of hope, a belief that we could forge a path forward, free from the toxic influence of Eleanor's manipulation. Ben, to his credit, seemed determined to make amends. He was open and remorseful, acknowledging the ways in which he had failed me, failed us, by allowing his mother to wield such control over our lives. "I was weak, Ava," he confessed one night as we sat together on the porch, the cool evening breeze offering a respite from the emotional turmoil we'd been grappling with. "I let her get into my head, and I lost sight of what really mattered." I reached for his hand, giving it a gentle squeeze. "We both made mistakes, Ben. But what matters now is that we're willing to fight for each other, for our family." He nodded, his eyes shining with a renewed sense of purpose. "I'm ready to do whatever it takes, Ava. No more secrets, no more letting my mother dictate our lives." In the weeks that followed, we worked tirelessly to rebuild the trust that had been shattered. We went to counseling, laying bare the wounds that had festered for far too long. And slowly, gradually, we began to find our way back to each other. But just as we were starting to gain our footing, a curveball came hurtling our way, one that threatened to upend everything we'd been working towards. It started with a phone call from the nursing home where Eleanor had been staying. She'd suffered a minor stroke, they told us, and while she was stable, the prognosis was uncertain. Ben was beside himself, torn between the desire to stand by his mother in her time of need and the lingering resentment he felt towards her manipulative ways. "I don't know if I can do this, Ava," he confessed, his voice thick with emotion. "After everything she's put us through, how can I just show up and pretend like nothing happened?" I understood his hesitation, his anger. Eleanor had inflicted deep wounds on our family, and the scars were still raw. But in that moment, I knew that we had a choice to make, a choice that would define the path forward for all of us. "Ben," I said, taking his hand in mine, "this is your chance to break the cycle, to show Eleanor that you're not going to let her control you anymore, but that you're still willing to be there for her as a son should." He searched my eyes, looking for reassurance, for guidance. And in that moment, I knew that the decision rested squarely on my shoulders. "Whatever you decide, I'll support you," I promised. "But think about what kind of man you want to be, what kind of example you want to set for our children and grandchildren." Ben was silent for a long moment, weighing the gravity of the situation. And then, with a deep breath, he made his choice. "I'll go to her," he said, his voice resolute. "But not as the dutiful son she's always expected. I'll go as my own man, on my own terms." As I watched him gather his things, a sense of pride swelled within me. This was the man I had fallen in love with all those years ago, a man of strength, of integrity, who was finally ready to forge his own path. And in that moment, I knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, we would face them together, as true partners, united in our determination to build a life defined by love, respect, and the freedom to choose our own destiny. The decision to move Eleanor into a care facility was one of the most difficult choices Ben and I had to make. On one hand, the thought of entrusting her care to strangers felt like a betrayal of the familial bonds that had once held us together. But on the other, the weight of her manipulation and the toll it had taken on our lives was a burden we could no longer bear. In the end, it was a decision born of necessity. A recognition that for our family to truly heal, we needed to establish boundaries and create a space where we could rebuild without the constant specter of Eleanor's influence looming over us. The day we moved her into the facility, a palpable tension hung in the air. Eleanor, ever the master of manipulation, alternated between bouts of feigned frailty and biting remarks, her words aimed like daggers at the heart of our newfound resolve. "You'll regret this," she hissed as Ben and I helped her settle into her new room. "Mark my words, you'll come crawling back, begging for my forgiveness." But Ben, to his credit, remained steadfast. "This is for the best, Mother," he said, his voice tinged with a sadness that betrayed the depth of his internal struggle. "We all need a chance to start over, to heal." Eleanor's eyes narrowed, her lips curling into a sneer. "Start over? You think you can just erase decades of history, of the sacrifices I've made for this family?" I placed a gentle hand on Ben's arm, a silent reminder that we were in this together, united against the forces that had once threatened to tear us apart. "No one is erasing anything, Eleanor," I said, my voice calm but firm. "We're simply creating the space we need to move forward, on our own terms." She scoffed, her disdain palpable. "Your terms? Don't make me laugh. You'll see, Ava. In the end, you'll come crawling back, just like everyone else." With those parting words, she turned away from us, her shoulders hunched in a posture of defiant resignation. It was a bitter farewell, but one that felt strangely liberating. As Ben and I left the facility that day, hand in hand, I couldn't help but feel a sense of relief wash over me. It was as if a weight had been lifted, a burden we'd been carrying for far too long finally set down. In the weeks and months that followed, we worked tirelessly to rebuild our lives, to forge a path forward that was defined by our own choices, our own desires. Ben visited his mother regularly, but always with a newfound sense of boundaries and self-respect. And slowly, gradually, the fractures that had once threatened to tear our family apart began to heal. Lila and Jessie, inspired by our journey, found their own paths. Lila pursuing her dreams of becoming a chef, Jessie embracing the role of devoted husband and father. And through it all, they remained a constant source of support, a reminder of the unbreakable bonds that had sustained us through even the darkest of times. As for Ben and me, we rediscovered the love that had first brought us together, that had carried us through the challenges and triumphs of decades past. We learned to communicate openly, to navigate the complexities of our relationship with honesty and compassion. And in those quiet moments when the weight of the past threatened to overwhelm us, we would remind each other of the strength we'd found in our journey, the resilience that had carried us through the storm and into the calm waters of a new beginning. We rebuilt from the ashes, I would whisper to Ben as we sat together on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of gold and crimson. We're a stronger family now, defined by love and respect. And in those moments, I knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, we would face them together, united in our determination to forge a life that was truly our own.
My name is Tracy. I'm 39 years old and I enjoy watching movies with my husband during breaks from parenting and household chores. I feel fortunate that we can keep the romance alive and not just be husband and wife but lovers, like before we were married. My friends often tell me, my husband treats me more like a mom than a lover or wife. Tracy, I'm so jealous. It's not bad being in a couple's mood no matter the age. I hope we can keep this relationship going in the future. We never fight, but there was one time when our relationship nearly reached a breaking point. It happened when we were still in our 20s. Brian said, "Should we get married soon?" About 6 months into our relationship. Brian, who was still just my boyfriend at the time, suddenly proposed. He said it as casually as if he were suggesting going to the store. He proposed while we were watching TV in my room, so naturally, there was no mood. And it wasn't the romantic proposal I had dreamed of. But this genuine, unforced proposal felt very us, and I liked that. I immediately accepted his proposal, and we decided to get married. We had been dating for 6 months. I didn't know everything about him, but I knew his character well enough. I thought I could be happy with him, but then, 3 weeks after his proposal, he said with a troubled look, "Something complicated has come up." His unusually exhausted expression made me worried, too. "What's wrong?" I asked. "My sister, she wants to meet you." "Huh?" "We'll go to greet her for the marriage, right?" "We'll meet her then." "Yes, but she wants to meet just us before the greeting." "Oh, that's nice." "I'm happy she wants to meet." "Well, it's a bit complicated with my family." "What do you mean?" Brian reluctantly started to explain something quite serious for me. Who was about to marry into his family. Apparently, his family was quite wealthy. His father had won the lottery when he was single and used that money to start a candy company in their hometown. Gradually, their store became established in the community, and now they have second and third stores in the county. "Wow," I said, and he chuckled bitterly, "Just nouveau riche." His tone was harsher than humble. "That's not like him. You don't have to talk about your family like that." "No, that's really how it is. My dad's sense of money is skewed because of that sudden wealth. And my sister, she's like that, too." "Oh. I can't explain it well, but because they're such a troublesome family. I'm actually worried about introducing you to them during the marriage meeting. He's usually a calm person who never speaks ill of others." It was surprising and increasingly worrying to hear him speak so harshly about his own family. What kind of troublesome family were they, I wondered. But I'm generally positive. I told him, "It's okay, I'd love to meet your sister since we have the chance." He reluctantly agreed, "If you say so." So came the day I first met his sister, Jenny. I was wrong. I was speechless at the tyrannical behavior of the sister-in-law. She looked every bit the wealthy person, from her appearance. Even I, who am not familiar with brands, could tell she was carrying a famous brand bag. And her accessories included large gemstones. I couldn't tell the brands of her clothes and shoes since they didn't have visible logos. But they must all be branded, too. Why do I assume that? Because Brian had told me beforehand that his sister didn't work and was still receiving an allowance from her parents while living at home, even though she was nearing 30. Such a winner in the unemployed world, a super elite unemployed. She said to me during the meal, "I had someone I wanted Brian to marry." She's a friend of mine, from a wealthy family, too. Okay. Stop it, sis. Confused me, and the sister-in-law who was proceeding with the conversation as if she didn't care. And Brian chiding her, quickly cooled the atmosphere between the three of us. When I told you that discussion was over, Brian said, and she snapped, "Don't talk back to your sister. You should just listen to what your sister says." The younger son born later. Marriage is my choice. No, you always sulk so easily. You're really the most selfish one in our family. In this house, a reasonable argument is interpreted as selfishness. And it seems they are people who don't hesitate to impose unreasonable demands. Brian sighed deeply with genuine annoyance. We've met with Tracy now, so let's go home, and he got up from his seat. He went to pay first. I quickly followed him and took out my wallet. Meanwhile, the sister-in-law made no move to take out hers, even though she was the one who had invited us today. The younger brother who was invited ended up paying for his sister's meal. I couldn't help but think that it's really the sister-in-law who is the selfish one. "Give me your contact information, Tracy." Saying this, the sister-in-law reached for her phone, not even bothering to pull out her wallet. Yes. Reluctantly, I gave her my contact because she's his sister after all. Brian had told me repeatedly not to give it to her. But she's going to be my family by marriage. I couldn't just snub her. However, I was wrong again. 2 days after our meeting, I received an email from the sister-in-law that read, "I've decided my brother will marry my friend after all. I've arranged for them to meet, so please step aside." I was alone in my room when I read it, but I couldn't help but say aloud, "What is this?" Should I reply? Ignoring it didn't seem right. But what could I possibly respond to such a message? As I was pondering this, more emails from the sister-in-law kept coming in. "I do not accept you as part of our family. You and he are not a good match. I want him to marry someone decent so that she can support me after our parents are gone. Don't interfere." It seemed she had no intention of working, and fully expected her brother to support her in the future. I didn't reply to her emails and immediately informed Brian. As soon as he saw the emails, his face went pale, and upon questioning him, he confessed. "My sister introduced her friend to me. I thought the emails were just lies and threats to break us up. But apparently, she was serious." What about me? Am I going to be dumped? There's no way that's going to happen. Brian exclaimed angrily. "Sorry for raising my voice. No, it's okay. But I have no intention of marrying her friend. And what's with these emails? I don't even plan to support my sister. Yet she's making all these arrangements behind my back." Seeing him so angry at his sister's actions, I felt relieved. Unlike his sister, he was truly a decent person. 2 weeks passed. He told me to block his sister's emails, but I thought that would be too much and didn't do it. Since then, I haven't received any more emails from her. He also firmly refused to date the woman his sister was pushing. The situation was troublesome because the woman took a liking to him, and the sister-in-law was eager to set them up. But you can't just proceed with something ignoring the person's will. Unexpected obstacles had come up. But today was finally the day of our marriage introduction. That meant meeting his parents. My parents were also coming. Brian suggested, maybe we should just call it off? It's not going to end well anyway. But that wasn't acceptable. I wanted to do things properly. Just because the sister-in-law is crazy doesn't mean his parents aren't respectable. He told me not to expect much. But you don't know until you meet them. However, it was a mistake for the third time. Nice to meet you. You're Tracy? Yes, nice to meet you. Please take care of me. Brian's father looked at me sternly. That look alone told me they didn't think well of me. Brian's mother gave a small nod, and right next to her, the sister-in-law smirked and said, "Long time no see, Tracy." There was zero welcoming mood. It was a surprising no response. How could they dislike me without even meeting me? It must be the sister-in-law's doing. Where are Tracy's parents? My mother is working today. She'll join us as soon as she finishes. My father is stuck in traffic. I'm sorry for making you wait on such an important day. Really now, we're taking time out of our busy schedules to be here. With that, Brian's father snorted. I could only apologize, feeling down, but Brian reassured me, "Don't worry about it." Trying to ease the tension, I suggested, "Shall we start the meal?" "Of course," said his father. It felt uncomfortable, though. Such a tense atmosphere. "I've been looking forward to the food here," said the sister-in-law excitedly as she looked around the restaurant. Brian's mother added, "I wanted to come here too, but it's always been hard to get a reservation." Today's meeting place was a famous old high-end restaurant in the neighboring town, featured on TV. The French cuisine made from organic vegetables and local fresh meat and fish is superb. And despite the price, it has many repeat customers. Reservations are necessary, and it's so popular that it's hard to book, making a second visit difficult for many. Trying to improve my image, Brian explained to his family. Tracy managed to get the reservation. "Wow, you managed to get it." His mother looked surprised. I laughed. Thanks to him, the atmosphere seemed a bit more relaxed at first. That's good, I thought, and then, "By the way, what do your parents do for work, Tracy?" Brian's father asked. "I don't even know," Brian added. "What? You don't know what your girlfriend's parents do?" "I'm not dating her parents, so it doesn't matter." "What if her family wants you to take over their business?" "Then that's fine by me, I guess. You know, Howard may be the heir, but you're also an important son to our family," Brian's father said. In response to his father's words, Brian retorted with annoyance. "You mean an important tool, right? It's my life, let me live it how I want." Howard, who was absent that day, is his brother. Unlike Brian, who often clashes with his family, Howard seems to get along very well with them, and has been directly appointed by his father to take over the company. Really, I wanted to stabilize the company by marrying him off to a wealthy girl. His father grumbled. Jenny chimed in condescendingly, "Such a disgrace to the parents." "I don't want to be lectured by a sister who's still clinging to her parents' apron strings," Brian retorted, causing his mother to remain silent. The atmosphere was terrible. Girls should just stay home and take care of the house. "Don't worry, Jenny, I'll find you a good match soon enough." "Papa, you're the best." With that, Jenny smiled, not entirely displeased by her father's words. Seeing this, I thought, like father, like daughter. Brian sighed. It's embarrassing how his disreputable family behaves in their usual manner in front of his fiancée. So, getting back to the subject, Tracy's parents are. Just as his father tried to steer the conversation back, a waiter appeared and announced, "Your guest has arrived," followed by my father peeking through. "Sorry for being late," my father apologized, dressed in a suit. Even the usually rude father-in-law couldn't afford to be disrespectful in front of my father, who was slightly older, managing only a terse, no. The roads were so congested, and my car isn't comfortable at all. My back is killing me from the long drive, my father laughed heartily. "What kind of car do you drive?" the father-in-law asked. "A light truck. I'm a farmer, so I often need to carry soil. Can't really drive anything flashy. Thanks to that, I'm on my third light truck. Just keep buying them over and over." My father laughed again, while the father-in-law's face seemed permanently contorted. "What did you say now?" he demanded with a demonic glare, causing me and my father to look puzzled. "Is there a problem with a light truck? Would a large pickup truck have been more acceptable?" "You said you're a farmer?" "Yes." My father nodded several times, visibly intimidated by the father-in-law's stare. In between, Brian said positively, "Oh, you're a farmer," and I smiled, "Yes." Unbelievable. The father-in-law stood up abruptly and slammed the table hard. Not only us, but other customers also looked shocked. Jenny was right, love marriages are worthless. Bringing such a despicable poor person into our family. I couldn't believe my ears. Is he calling me a despicable poor person? Isn't that extremely rude? Brian, cut ties with this woman right now. I will not accept her as my daughter-in-law. What? It's not up to you to choose my partner. No. Her family is nowhere near a match for ours. What do you mean not a match? You act like a local dignitary. But you're just nouveau riche from a lottery win. That's when my father stepped in. I'm sorry, but why must you say such things? The father-in-law snorted through his nose. Humph, if you don't even understand that, you're even less suitable as a spouse. It's just a farmer, you know? A farmer. What's wrong with being a farmer? Day in, day out, covered in mud, crawling on the ground just like a lowly citizen. Probably best friends with moles and worms. It's outrageous to come to a high-end restaurant in a light truck. Isn't it embarrassing that you've proven yourself to be such a poor person? With no common sense? I don't think my job is as lowly as you say, and while I might understand a dress code, I don't think there's one for cars. What's wrong with a light truck? After all, my parents and I are not the same entity. Oh please, the howling of the poor. Stop whining and go back to being poor. The marriage is off. With that, the father-in-law slammed the table again. Brian was arguing back. But it seemed there was no reasoning with this stubborn father-in-law. My father probably felt the same. Shall we go? He looked at me as if to say, give up, and I steeled myself. Yeah. Taking my response, he stood up then, we'll be leaving. Go, go. I'll pay for the meal of the poor, so just disappear quickly. The father-in-law shouted abusively. Brian was angry, demanding his father stop, but his words fell on deaf ears. Don't defy your parents, he screamed. And then threw a framed picture from the wall at us. The sudden display of violence from the father-in-law froze us all in place. Even the waiter, carrying soup, was stunned by the overturned bowl. Jenny seemed a bit surprised but smirked, "Serves you right," as she looked at us. Such a spiteful nature. The mother-in-law, witnessing all this, did nothing to admonish Jenny or her husband. Brian, dismayed by the situation, apologized. "Sorry for making you feel bad. I'll get in touch properly," and urged me to go home for the day. After leaving the restaurant with my father, my cell phone rang a short while later as we drove away. The caller was the sister-in-law, Jenny. Why would she call at this time? I thought. And while I casually checked my bag to make sure I hadn't forgotten anything, my phone rang again. "Dad, I'm getting a call from that lady over there." "Just ignore it." "But she's really persistent." "Look, it stopped, but now she's calling again." "Well, I guess you have to answer it then." I sighed, resigned, and answered the call from Jenny. "Hello? Jenny?" Finally, you answered. "Please, I'm begging you, come back to the restaurant." Jenny sounded nearly hysterical on the phone. What on earth was going on? Huh? What's suddenly come up? You were the ones who told us to leave. Well, I don't really understand. But the restaurant staff said they won't forgive you unless they apologize to you. Oh. Hearing that, I couldn't help but smile wryly. I see, that's what this is about. I chuckled inwardly, thinking things were getting interesting. Could it be that the picture frame that your father threw got broken? Yes. Not only that, but the spilled soup stained the painting inside it. Oh dear. That sounds like an expensive item was ruined. Now they're saying we have to compensate for it. But they might forgive you if you apologize. What kind of relationship do you have with the restaurant staff? They keep telling me to ask you directly, and won't tell me anything. That restaurant is run by our relatives. What? Didn't you find it strange? A popular restaurant that usually requires a year's reservation. And yet, we managed to book for 2 families within a month of the proposal. Now that you mention it. It was because it's run by relatives. We were lucky to get seats due to a cancellation. And by the way, my mother works there too. Remember the person who brought the soup? That was my mother. What? That person, she's the one saying you need to apologize. She probably saw everything and got angry on our behalf. I don't really understand, but please come back to the restaurant. I was about to say no when Jenny let out a small squeal. What now? Tracy? Please, I'm begging you, come back to the restaurant. Brian's father had taken the phone. Their pleas sounded so similar, I couldn't help but laugh a little. I decided to let my dad join the conversation and switched my phone to speaker mode. I refuse. Weren't you the one who told us to leave? I retorted with a smirk. I'm sorry. I had no idea you were affiliated with the restaurant. Why would you lie about being a farmer? I wasn't lying. My father is a farmer, and though he's listed as the owner, my aunt actually manages the place. If you had told me earlier, a daughter connected to this restaurant is certainly not a poor person. She's suitable for my son. Let's forget what happened today. And please come into our family. After what's been said, it's too late. What? Are you dissatisfied? It's irritating the way you're speaking. You haven't apologized, and as soon as you find the family is convenient for you, you flip your stance and say to come into your family. It's extremely unpleasant. You dare to act high and mighty. It's also your fault for not behaving like rich people. At that, my father chuckled as Brian's father started to get irate. Do you think acting like a rich person involves yelling? And intimidating someone you think is beneath you? What? What's so fun about flaunting your wealth? If that's all the joy you have, that's pretty sad. What do you mean, acting high and mighty? You're boasting about being wealthy, but what's the point? Is it enjoyable to be envied by others? Or do you want to increase your chances of being robbed? If so, that's quite an unusual hobby. I couldn't help but laugh at my father's pointed comments. Brian's father, clearly infuriated by the response, was huffing and puffing over the phone. My father could almost see his irritated face, and seemed to be enjoying provoking him. Did you deliberately make him angry, Dad? You're still such a mischief maker. Despite offering to accept the marriage, you disregard my generosity. If that's your idea of generosity, we don't need it. Just as my father firmly spoke, Brian's voice resonated through the room. I don't need Dad's approval anyway. I was taken aback and listened intently to the voice. What are you talking about, Brian? Coming out of nowhere, his father said, clearly annoyed. It's fine. Today is the last day I'll deal with Dad anyway. What? What do you mean? I want to marry Tracy, so I'm cutting ties with this family. That's why Dad doesn't need to approve our marriage. What? Do you think such selfishness is allowed? Do you really think you have the right to approve your child's marriage? If you leave the family, who will smooth over the issue with the damaged picture frame at that woman's house? That's why I'm leaving. I'm tired of being used. Brian's angry voice silenced his father. What am I to you, Dad? Expected to support my jobless sister, marry rich for the family. Build connections in case the business fails, never talk back. I'm not a slave. You're the one who never talks back, so I prepared the best life for you. Why would supporting a sister who doesn't work be considered the best life for me? The best life always seems to be reserved for her. That's, well, I know the reason behind our parents' unhappy marriage. What? My father and I were taken aback. I thought they just didn't talk much, but it seems Brian's parents really didn't get along. Dad, you think I'm not your child, don't you? That's. Brian's father stumbled over his words, and our expressions stiffened. You've been misunderstanding Mom, thinking she had an affair with the store manager? I heard it from Grandma, who passed away. That's not a misunderstanding. Mom was unusually close to that man back then. That's because you were hitting Mom even at the store out of stress from work. And the manager was just looking out for her. I don't know the real story. Mom is innocent. Everyone from that time said so, and my genes say the same. What? I had a DNA test done with Dad. The result showed a 99.9% probability that I am his biological son. A bit disappointing, though. What? Brian's father's voice faded, and his mother intervened. Why can't you? I had a DNA test done between Brian and you too. I showed you the results. But you didn't believe it. I can't believe a word that cheating woman says. Don't say things just because you're convinced of them. I've told you many times, I am innocent. His mother's voice was tearful, likely overwhelmed by years of sorrow. Well, anyone could see she's innocent. I've even talked to the manager's wife, who wasn't suspicious but rather worried about Mom. And yet, because of unfounded accusations, she was driven to resign. It's sad what happened to the manager. Brian sighed. He says his sister and brother resemble their father. But he is said to be like his mother. Shortly before it was known his mother was pregnant, his parents clashed over business management, leading to their discord. His mother had consulted the then manager, asking, "Can everyone really keep up with such management policies?" Brian's father mistook this for an affair, seeing his newly born son's face, thinking, "The older two resemble me, but this one doesn't. He must be the manager's child." For years, he was less loved in the family, yet expected to take care of his sister in the future, treated more like a tool. Worried about Mom, I didn't cut ties with the family. But if I have to choose between such a family and a new one I might build with Tracy, I choose the latter. As of today, I'm cutting ties with this family. Brian. Think it over. Say something, Mom. If Brian leaves, Howard will have to take care of Jenny. His declaration panicked his father. Nevertheless, the content of his words was despicable. He repeatedly expressed his desire not to lose a cash cow son. "I was wrong," his mother murmured. "What?" both his father and sister exclaimed. "I kept hoping that eventually, Brian would be acknowledged as your son. That even a marriage for money could turn into one for love. I persisted out of stubbornness. But that was the wrong choice. I've only caused Brian pain." His mother's words left his father slightly trembling. "What do you mean?" "Please divorce me. I can't take it anymore. Brian, be free. I'm sorry for everything. I gave up arguing because nothing got through to you, and that hurt you. Mom. How can such selfishness be allowed?" While he was lost for words, his father vociferously claimed his own self-centered views. "Even if you don't agree, the law will recognize it. If you won't agree to a divorce, I will take it to court," Brian's mother stated calmly. "Wait. Let's calm down, okay? If we talk it out, I'm sure we cannot understand each other." "How can you say that? Though we couldn't see him over the phone." His disheartened tone painted a clear picture of Brian's father slumping down. Just when the line went silent, my mother's voice chimed in. "Sorry to interrupt while you're all heated up, but the frame and painting, you'll need to compensate us $80,000, okay?" $80,000. You said it was $50,000. Jenny panicked. "No, the painting itself is $50,000, and the frame is $30,000. I felt like you weren't really listening, and it turns out you really weren't. You've got to be kidding." Brian's laughter burst through the phone, replacing Jenny's despairing voice. My father and I also shared a laugh, saying, "What a perfect ending," and then we hung up. Afterward, Brian, as he declared, cut ties with his family and even took my surname, expressing a desire to change his name. My father was overjoyed, saying, "I've gained a son." Soon, Brian might officially become his son-in-law. Following the divorce, Brian's parents separated. His father was not only required to split the assets with his mother, but also had to pay compensation for the emotional distress caused during their marriage, with the obligation to also settle the payments for the frame and painting. It was a significant loss. Though they were wealthy, this level of expense was still notable. Freed from her marriage, Brian's mother felt emboldened, or perhaps more relaxed, and began sharing her past grievances with local people. This chatter ended up on a community online forum, leading to rampant speculation that quickly smeared the store's reputation. Though not bankrupt, customer visits dwindled, and the store, once bustling and handling high-end confectionaries, now echoed emptily. They shifted to selling cheaper sweets in bulk, but even that strategy wasn't hitting the mark, resulting in the closure of their second and third stores. It's hoped that the original store won't go under. Brian's brother, once the designated successor, quit the company to start his own business, refusing to take care of Jenny as suggested. He wanted distance from the family, leading to his resignation. Now, Brian's father struggles to manage the nearly bankrupt shop. And his still dependent daughter, Jenny. Why do we know so much about a family we've cut ties with? Well, after Brian left, his brother, who also distanced himself from their family, came to our wedding celebration. He too was dissatisfied with his family's ways and celebrated Brian's departure as a joyous occasion. Since he still occasionally hears from his family, we get updates through him. The nouveau riche family, disdainful of farmers, has been steadily declining in a somewhat ironic twist. Since then, my husband and I have had 2 daughters. Despite hearing that girls are less troublesome, they are as mischievous as boys, keeping us up day and night. Born close together, they fought constantly in their younger years, and as they grew, they brought home bugs by the dozens, came back muddy, and had their share of fights with friends. These children never cease to bring me challenging news. But seeing them healthy is what matters most. And though they often fight, they make up quickly. True, they give me quite the headache with their tomboy antics. But watching their sleeping faces at night, I think to myself, I'm glad I had them. And next to me, drooling in his sleep, is my husband, looking adorable to me. Love is truly blind, huh? Soon, our family will grow by one more, aiming for a big family, you know?
I never imagined that I would be sitting in the living room of our former home, feeling as though I had never been here before. I'm Emily, and I was enjoying what I believed to be a happy life with my husband, Mark, until a few months ago. I thought we were the pair that everyone admired. Mark had changed from being a kind man to someone I barely knew. His eyes, which had been warm, suddenly were frigid and far away. With the death of my father, everything changed. Losing my dad was like losing a piece of myself since he was my rock. For Mark, however, it appeared to be a chance. I was sitting opposite Mark in the stifling evening air. The laughter and joy that used to fill this room were a sharp contrast to the stillness that existed between us. "Are you even listening to me, Emily?" The quiet was broken by Mark's piercing, agitated voice. I raised my head to meet his eyes. I said, "Yes, I'm listening," in a voice that was almost audible above a whisper. "It's easy. I'd like a divorce. I've spoken with a lawyer already. This house belongs to me. You must begin your search for a new residence." His remarks were like a ton of bricks to me. I had seen that we were getting farther apart, but divorce? I couldn't speak. "Mark, you can't be serious. Are you simply going to discard everything after all these years?" I said it at last, with a hint of incredulity in my voice. With a chilly, unimpressed expression on his face, Mark reclined in his chair. "Emily, it's not simply throwing away. Things are changing. I've been feeling stuck in this marriage, and now that your father is no longer with us, I don't see the need to keep up this facade." I experienced a mix of sadness and rage. How could he be so callous and cruel? In addition to my father's absence, Mark, whom I had trusted and loved, was also leaving me. "Mark, I don't understand you. You used to be so unique and kind. What became of us?" Mark laughed sarcastically. "Oh, Emily, please don't put up with the drama. Packing should begin. It's best that you leave as soon as possible." Stunned and saddened, I sat there trying to take it all in. Not only did our marriage fail, but an illusion, the image of a beautiful existence that I had held on to for so long, was shattered. And now I was alone myself, with only recollections of a love that proved to be a facade. The entrance of Mark's mother, Mrs. Harwood, further descended into turmoil in my already precarious existence. She entered the house without warning, bringing with her a hostile aura that suffocated the already tense environment. With a stern voice, Mrs. Harwood sat down in the living room and said, "Emily, I expect you to behave appropriately while I'm here," clearly feeling in control. I made an effort to reason with her. "Mrs. Harwood, I understand this is a difficult time for everyone, but I assure you, I have no intention of causing trouble." She gave me a chilly look. "My darling, trouble seems to follow you. I've observed your and Mark's lifestyle. My son's desire for a divorce is understandable. I wasn't going to let her walk over me, even if her remarks were hurtful. Mark and I have grown up. We'll take care of things on our own. You don't need to meddle." She laughed. "Interference. I'm shielding my son from your deceptive tactics. You've already caused enough harm." The days that followed were a haze of Mrs. Harwood's incessant insults and disparaging remarks. She was critical of everything, even my cooking and clothing choices. She seemed to be attempting to remove me from the house. She entered the kitchen one evening when I was making dinner. "You're overdoing the salt. Are you completely ignorant of cooking?" I tried to maintain my composure by clenching my jaw. I spent years preparing meals for Mark and myself. He has never voiced any complaints. But I'm not, and he's too nice to say anything. "Your awful cooking is destroying his health." I was shocked by this woman's boldness. "Mrs. Harwood, I appreciate your concern, but I can manage." Leaning on the counter, she kept a hawk eye on me. "You're capable, aren't you? How long that lasts will be determined." Every encounter with her was a practice in self-control. She had strong opinions about everything and didn't hesitate to express them frequently. She seemed to be attempting to agitate me, to test my limits. There was nothing Mark could do to defuse the situation. I had to defend myself against his mother's constant attacks since he avoided being in the same room as us. He was obviously not interested in defending me. No more. One morning, as I sat at the breakfast table, Mrs. Harwood sat across from me, her eyes cold and calculating. "You know, Emily, it's not too late to leave gracefully. You could save yourself a lot of trouble." I met her gaze, my resolve hardening. "I have as much right to be here as you do, Mrs. Harwood. I'm not leaving until the divorce is finalized." She smirked. "Stubborn, aren't you? Well, we'll see how long that lasts. Mark doesn't want you here, and neither do I. You're just a guest, and guests can be asked to leave." Her words echoed in my head, a constant reminder of the unwelcome and precarious position I found myself in. But I wasn't about to give up. I had to stand my ground, no matter how difficult Mrs. Harwood made it. The house had become a battleground, and I was determined not to be the one who surrendered. Living with Mrs. Harwood under the same roof was like walking on eggshells. But the day she crossed the line was when she targeted my cat, Whiskers. Whiskers was more than just a pet. He was a part of my world, a comfort in my loneliest times. I came home to find Mrs. Harwood standing in the hallway, a look of disgust on her face as she glared at Whiskers. "That filthy animal," she spat. "I wanted out of my son's house. It's either the cat or you, Emily." I felt a surge of anger. Whiskers isn't going anywhere. He's part of this family. She sneered. "That thing is a nuisance. I won't have it shedding and spreading germs all over." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "He's a harmless cat, Mrs. Harwood. You're being unreasonable." She moved closer, her voice cold and harsh. "Listen here, Emily. I call the shots now. Either that cat goes, or things will get very unpleasant for you." I knew arguing with her was futile. She had made up her mind, and nothing I said would change it. I had to think fast. That's when I remembered my friend Sarah, an animal lover who had always adored Whiskers. I called Sarah, my voice shaky. "Sarah, I need a huge favor. Can you look after Whiskers for a while? I'm in a bit of a situation here." Sarah was quick to respond. "Of course, Emily. What's going on? Are you okay?" I sighed. "It's a long story. I'll explain later, but thank you. You're a lifesaver." Packing Whiskers' things felt like a defeat, but I knew it was for the best. As I was about to leave with Whiskers, Mrs. Harwood blocked my path. Finally, some sense, she said, a smug smile on her face. "I knew you'd do the right thing." I held back my anger. "This isn't over, Mrs. Harwood. I'm doing this for Whiskers, not for you." She laughed. "Oh, keep telling yourself that, dear. But we both know who's in charge here." One day, I found my clothes ruined, my favorite dress, my comfy sweaters. Everything was bleached. It was no accident. I stormed into the living room where Mrs. Harwood was reading a magazine, looking too innocent. "Did you do this?" I held up the ruined dress, my voice shaking with anger. She looked up, feigning surprise. "Oh dear, what happened to your dress?" "Don't play dumb, Mrs. Harwood. You put bleach in the wash," I accused. She shrugged, a smirk creeping onto her face. "Oh, that? I was cleaning the machine. Must have forgotten to rinse it out." "Accidents happen, dear." I was fuming. "This wasn't an accident. You did this on purpose." She leaned back, her eyes gleaming with satisfaction. "Prove it, Emily. It's my word against yours, and we both know who my son will believe." I felt helpless and defeated. She was right. Mark would never take my side over his mother's. Later that day, I confronted Mark. "Your mother ruined my clothes. You need to talk to her." Mark didn't even look up from his phone. "Mom said it was an accident. Stop making a big deal out of everything." I couldn't believe his indifference. "She's doing this on purpose," I said. "Mark, can't you see what she's doing?" He sighed, annoyed. "Look, Emily, I don't want to get involved. Just stay out of her way." Stay out of her way. This was supposed to be my home, too. I realized then that I was alone in this. Mark wouldn't help me. His mother was out to get me, and I had to fend for myself. The destruction of my clothes was just the beginning of Mrs. Harwood's campaign against me. Each day brought a new challenge, a new way for her to assert her dominance, and make me feel unwelcome in my own home. I started to notice little things missing or out of place. My favorite mug was cracked, my pictures taken down from the walls. Small but personal attacks. It was a psychological game, and she was playing to win. One evening, I came home to find the living room in a mess. My books were scattered on the floor, pages torn. I confronted Mrs. Harwood, who was sitting calmly with a cup of tea. "Did you do this?" I asked, holding up a torn book. She glanced at it, then back at me with a cold, indifferent expression. "Oh, those old things. I thought they were trash. You should be more careful about what you leave around." I was outraged. "These are my books, Mrs. Harwood. You have no right to touch them." She shrugged, unfazed. "This is my son's house. I'll do as I please. Maybe you should start packing your trash." I felt a burning anger, but also a sense of helplessness. Arguing with her was pointless. She had made it clear that she didn't respect me or my belongings. The next morning, I found my toiletries thrown in the trash, my shampoo, my face cream, everything gone. I dug them out, my hands shaking with anger. This was more than just petty sabotage. It was a declaration of war. I confronted Mark again. "Your mother threw away my toiletries. This has to stop." He barely glanced at me. "Maybe it was a mistake." "A mistake?" She's doing this deliberately, Mark. Can't you see that? I was near tears, frustrated by his continued indifference. He stood up, his voice cold. I'm not getting into this, Emily. Sort it out with her. Sort it out with her. How was I supposed to sort out deliberate cruelty? I tried to keep to myself to avoid Mrs. Harwood, but she seemed to take my avoidance as a challenge. She'd make loud, snide comments about me on the phone, ensuring I could hear every word. She'd accidentally spill things on the floor I just cleaned, watching me as I cleaned up, a satisfied smirk on her face. One afternoon, I found my laptop screen cracked. It was the last straw. I stormed into the kitchen where Mrs. Harwood was humming to herself. What did you do to my laptop? I demanded, my voice shaking with rage. She turned, feigning ignorance. Oh, did something happen to your laptop? That's unfortunate. You did this, didn't you? You're trying to make my life hell. She leaned in, her voice a venomous whisper. You brought this on yourself, Emily. You're not wanted here. The sooner you realize that, the better. Just when I thought things couldn't get worse with Mrs. Harwood, she struck where it hurt the most, my father's pictures. The last memories I had of him were gone. I had put them up in the living room, a small comfort in these trying times. But now the walls were bare, as if he had never been a part of my life. I found Mrs. Harwood in the kitchen, smirking over a cup of coffee. Where are my father's pictures? I demanded, trying to keep my voice steady. She looked up, feigning confusion. Pictures? Oh, those old things. We needed more space. This isn't a shrine, Emily. I felt a surge of anger, my hands trembling. Those were my father's pictures. You had no right to take them down. She shrugged, her voice cold and dismissive. They were depressing, always staring at us. It's time to move on, Emily. He's gone, and clinging to the past won't change that. I couldn't believe her cruelty. You can't just erase him from my life. Those pictures were all I had left of him. She stood up, towering over me. Your father has nothing to do with this house. It's time you accepted that and moved on. Just like your marriage. It's in the past now. I wanted to scream, to cry, to do something to show how much she had hurt me. But I knew that's what she wanted, so I held back, biting my tongue. You're heartless, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. She laughed, a harsh, grating sound. I'm practical, Emily. It's a trait you clearly lack. You should learn to let go. I left the kitchen, my heart heavy with loss and anger. Mrs. Harwood had taken the last piece of my father from me, and it felt like losing him all over again. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. The empty spaces on the walls echoed in my mind. Mrs. Harwood's words kept replaying in my head. Let go. Move on. But how could I? Those pictures were more than just images. They were a connection to my father, a reminder of his love and presence in my life. I knew then that this was more than just a battle over living space. It was a fight for my memories, my past, and my identity. Mrs. Harwood had declared war on the most personal parts of my life, and I couldn't let her win. I had to find a way to fight back, to reclaim my father's memory and my right to mourn him. It was a battle I couldn't afford to lose. Just when I thought all hope was lost, a call from a notary changed everything. I was sitting in my room, trying to muster the strength to face another day with Mrs. Harwood when my phone rang. Mrs. Emily Harwood? This is John Carter, the notary handling your father's will. We need you to come in to discuss some important matters, the voice on the other end said. I was taken aback. My father's will? I wasn't aware he had left anything. Yes, he did. It's quite urgent. Can you come in today? Mr. Carter's tone was serious. I agreed, curiosity and a glimmer of hope stirring within me. Maybe this was the break I needed. At the notary's office, Mr. Carter handed me a folder. "Your father left you a significant amount of money, Miss Emily, enough to start a new life." I was speechless. My father, always the quiet supporter, had given me a lifeline. "And there's something else," Mr. Carter continued, handing me another set of documents. "Your father left these for you. He said they were important." I opened the documents, but Mr. Carter stopped me. "Perhaps you should look at these in private. They're quite personal." I nodded, clutching the folder tightly as I left the office. Back home, I locked myself in my room and began to read. The documents were records of financial transactions between my father and Mark. My father had lent Mark a significant amount of money, over $200,000. I couldn't believe it. All this time, Mark had been in debt to my father. Was this why he was so eager to divorce me after my father's death? Did he think the debt died with him? I felt a surge of strength. For the first time since this nightmare began, I had the upper hand. My father had given me more than just money. He had given me the power to fight back. I wasn't going to be a victim anymore. I was going to make Mark pay for his deceit and Mrs. Harwood for her cruelty. The tables had turned, and it was my turn to set the rules. Armed with the truth about Mark's debt to my father, I felt a newfound sense of power. The day of the divorce signing, I was ready to turn the tables. As we sat in the lawyer's office, Mark and his mother smirking confidently, I waited for the right moment. Just as Mark was about to sign, I spoke up. "Before we finalize this, there's something you should know, Mark," I said, sliding the loan documents across the table. He glanced at them, his smirk fading fast. "What's this?" I leaned back, feeling in control for the first time in months. "That's the debt you owe my father, over $200,000. And now it's owed to me." Mrs. Harwood's eyes widened in shock. "What debt, Mark? What is she talking about?" Mark's face was a mask of panic. "It's nothing, Mom. Just some old business between Emily's dad and me." I laughed so. "You thought you'd get away with not repaying him. That's why you were so eager to get rid of me." Mark didn't meet my eyes. "It's complicated, Emily. I was in trouble, and your dad offered to help." I shook my head, disgusted. "You were going to leave me with nothing while sitting on a debt you owed my father. You're despicable." He tried to touch me, but I backed away. "You've been hiding this. You owe me that money, and I intend to collect." The lawyer, a middle-aged man who had been silent until now, interjected. "If these documents are legitimate, Mr. Mark, you're legally obligated to repay this debt." Mrs. Harwood turned to her son, her voice rising. "You borrowed money from her father, and now we have to pay her." Mark tried to speak, but I was faster. Yes, he did, and he thought he could escape it by divorcing me quickly after my father's death. The room was tense, the air thick with the revelation. Mrs. Harwood looked from the documents to Mark, her expression one of betrayal and anger. "You've been lying to us all along," she hissed at Mark. "You put us in this mess." Mark's usual confident demeanor had crumbled. He looked defeated, cornered. I had no choice. I was in trouble, and Emily's dad offered to help. I stood up, feeling a rush of satisfaction. "Well, now you can repay that help, every single dollar. You thought you could outsmart me, but you were wrong." Mrs. Harwood was fuming. "We'll fight this. We won't let you take everything from us." But I knew I had the upper hand. "You can try, but the law is on my side. I suggest you start figuring out how you're going to repay the debt." As I walked out of the lawyer's office, I felt a sense of triumph. For so long, I had been under Mark and his mother's control, their whims and cruelty dictating my life. But now the tables had turned. I had them right where I wanted them, and I wasn't going to let them off easy. This was my chance to get back what I was owed, and I was going to take it. The day Mark and Mrs. Harwood sold the house to repay the debt was the day I finally felt free. As they packed their last boxes, I couldn't help but savor the moment. "You brought this on yourself, Mark," I said, watching him struggle with a heavy box. "You could have been honest with me." His shoulders drooped as he avoided looking at me. "I understand. I apologize, Emily." Mrs. Harwood added, seeming older and more dejected than before. "You are solely to blame for this. Everything has been damaged by you." Her words had no effect on me anymore, so I shook my head. "You too caused this on yourself, Mrs. Harwood. I'm merely asserting my ownership of what is legitimately mine." Without saying another word, they drove off, and I saw their automobile vanish from view. An age of suffering and treachery, but also of development and fortitude, was coming to a close. I inhaled deeply as I felt the burden of the last several months subside. Time to make a fresh start. I brought Whiskers home with me and used the money I received from my father and the debt repayment to purchase a modest but comfortable home for us. I phoned my friend Sarah, who had supported me during my worst moments, while I sat in my new living room with Whiskers purring on my lap. "Hi, Sarah, it's finished." With a smile on my face, I declared, "I'm at last free." Sarah spoke in a kind and animated tone. "Emily, it is incredible. I'm really pleased with you. You've made such progress." A feeling of tranquility descended upon me as I surveyed my new house. I have, and I owe it all to those who supported me, like you. All the happiness in the world is yours to have. "Emily, what's next for you?" Sarah inquired. I paused to reflect. A new beginning. Constructing a life that is genuinely mine, and perhaps provide assistance to those who have experienced what I have. This was more than simply a new house, I thought as I hung up. A new chapter had begun, one in which I was in charge, and no longer had to deal with the ghosts of the past. In addition to surviving, I had emerged stronger. I got up and headed to the window to gaze out at my little garden, Whiskers trailing after me. It was a fresh start, an opportunity to start again and discover happiness in the little things. Despite the fact that I had lost a lot, I had gained strength, bravery, and a sense of self. This was my journey, my tale, and it was only getting started.
It was just another mundane Monday morning. I sat at my desk, staring at the computer screen, my fingers idly tapping against the keyboard. My eyes kept wandering to the bank statement lying next to me, a nagging feeling tugging at the back of my mind. Something wasn't right. I picked up the statement, scanning the list of transactions once again. A frown creased my forehead as I spotted the discrepancy, a recurring charge for an unfamiliar vendor amounting to a sizable sum each month. It didn't align with any of our typical expenses. "Nolan?" I called out to my husband, who was in the adjacent room. He poked his head through the doorway, his brows raised in question. "What's up, Bree?" I held up the bank statement, my eyes narrowing. "Do you know anything about these charges? They've been happening for a while now, and I can't figure out what they're for." Nolan glanced at the statement, his expression unreadable. He shrugged nonchalantly. "Must have slipped your mind. It's probably some subscription or something." I pursed my lips, unconvinced. "But for this much and for so long, I don't remember signing up for anything like this." He crossed the room, planting a kiss on my forehead. "You know how forgetful you can be sometimes," he said with a chuckle. "Don't worry about it. I'll look into it." His dismissive attitude only fueled my suspicion. I watched as he turned and left the room, a sinking feeling settling in the pit of my stomach. Throughout the day, my mind kept drifting back to the mysterious charges. Nolan's cavalier response did little to assuage my concerns. If anything, it made me more determined to uncover the truth. That evening, as we sat down for dinner, I broached the subject again. So, did you ever figure out what those charges were for? Nolan paused mid-bite, his eyes flickering briefly before settling on mine. Nope, haven't had a chance yet, but I'm sure it's nothing to worry about. His lack of urgency only served to heighten my unease. Nolan, we're talking about thousands of dollars here. How can you be so blasé about it? He let out an exasperated sigh. Brielle, I promise I'll look into it, but you need to trust me on this. Trust. The word hung heavy in the air, its weight pressing down on me. I wanted to trust him. I loved him, after all. But something deep within me refused to let go of the nagging doubt. As the days passed, the mysterious charges continued to appear, and Nolan's promises to investigate remained unfulfilled. The seed of suspicion had been planted, and with each passing day, it took root, growing stronger and more insidious. I knew I couldn't ignore it any longer. I had to get to the bottom of this, no matter where the truth might lead. The days blurred together, each one more strained than the last. Nolan's late nights at the office became more frequent, his excuses growing flimsier with each passing week. The distance between us seemed to widen with every lie that slipped from his lips. Another late meeting, he muttered one evening as he rushed out the door, his tie askew and his briefcase haphazardly stuffed with papers. I didn't bother responding. What was the point? Theo, our 8-year-old son, watched his father's departure with a puzzled frown. Mom, why is Dad always working so late? I forced a smile, ruffling his hair. He's just been really busy lately, sweetheart. Don't worry about it. But Theo's innocent question stirred something within me. The seeds of doubt that had taken root were now sprouting, their tendrils wrapping around my heart and constricting tighter with each passing day. A few evenings later, as I was tucking Theo into bed, he piped up again. Mom, who's Cora? I froze, my heart skipping a beat. What did you say? Cora, he repeated, his brow furrowed. Dad keeps talking about her at work. A cold chill ran down my spine. Pushing down the rising panic, I managed a strained smile. I'm sure it's just someone from the office, honey, nothing to worry about. But as I left Theo's room, my mind was racing. Who was this Cora? And why was Nolan constantly mentioning her name? The next day, I confided in my best friend Elise over coffee. Am I being paranoid here? I asked, my voice trembling. Or is there something going on that I'm missing? Elise's expression softened with concern. Bree, you know I love Nolan, but his behavior lately has been sketchy, to say the least. Those late nights, the unexplained charges, it's not looking good. I swallowed hard, my grip tightening around my mug. And now this Cora woman? What am I supposed to think? Elise reached across the table, squeezing my hand reassuringly. Look, I hate to say this, but I've heard rumors around the office about Nolan being seen with another woman. The air seemed to be sucked from my lungs. You're kidding. She shook her head solemnly. I wish I were. It could be nothing, but... Her words trailed off, but the implication hung heavy in the air. Suddenly, everything started to make sense. The late nights, the mysterious charges, the unknown woman's name. A sickening realization washed over me. Could Nolan really be having an affair? A few weeks later, I found myself at a company event hosted by Nolan's firm. I had been dreading the evening, but I knew it was crucial to put on a brave face, at least for the time being. As I mingled with colleagues and their spouses, my eyes constantly scanned the room, searching for any sign of the mysterious Cora. Part of me hoped she was just a figment of my imagination, a misunderstanding blown out of proportion. But deep down, I knew the truth was far more sinister. And then, as if summoned by my very thoughts, she appeared. A stunning woman in a form-fitting red dress, her dark hair cascading over her shoulders in perfect waves. She moved through the crowd with an air of confidence, turning heads wherever she went. My heart sank as I watched her approach a group of Nolan's coworkers, exchanging friendly banter and laughing at their jokes. This was her, Cora, the woman who had been occupying so much of my husband's time and thoughts. As if sensing my gaze, she turned and caught my eye. For a moment her expression faltered, a flicker of uncertainty crossing her features. Then, as quickly as it had appeared, it vanished, replaced by a casual smile. She sauntered over to me, her hips swaying with each step. Hi there, she said, extending her hand. I'm Cora. You must be one of the wives. I forced a tight-lipped smile, grasping her hand briefly. Brielle. Nice to meet you. Her eyes widened ever so slightly, but she recovered quickly. Lovely to meet you too, Brielle. I've heard so much about you. The lie dripped from her lips like honey, sickly sweet and utterly false. Anger bubbled within me, but I kept my composure, nodding politely. So, Cora, I said, my voice carefully measured. How do you know my husband? She laughed, a tinkling sound that set my teeth on edge. Oh, we've been working on a project together for a while now. Nolan's just the best, always staying late to make sure everything's perfect. My stomach churned at the implication behind her words. So, this was the reason for all those late nights, all those flimsy excuses. Nolan had been spending his time with this woman, this Cora, right under my nose. That's wonderful, I managed, fighting to keep the sarcasm from seeping into my tone. He's so dedicated to his work. Cora nodded eagerly, oblivious to the venom laced in my words. Absolutely. He's been such a great partner to work with. She leaned in conspiratorially, her voice dropping to a hushed whisper. Between you and me, he's mentioned a few times how his wife doesn't really understand the demands of his job. My hands clenched into fists at my sides, nails digging into my palms. The audacity of this woman standing before me and essentially admitting to her role in my husband's betrayal was almost too much to bear, but I forced myself to remain calm, to play along. For now. I would have my revenge, but it would be calculated, precise. Nolan and his mistress would reap what they had sown, and the consequences would be devastating. The days following the company event were a blur of pain and anger. I could barely look at Nolan without feeling a surge of white-hot rage coursing through my veins. The man I had loved, the man I had trusted, had betrayed me in the cruelest way imaginable. I knew I needed to confront him, to finally bring this sordid affair into the light. But I also knew I couldn't do it blindly. I needed proof, evidence to back up my accusations. That's when I reached out to a private investigator, a discreet professional recommended by a friend. Within days, he had compiled a dossier of damning information. Photographs of Nolan and Cora together, receipts for lavish dinners and hotel stays, even records of suspicious financial transactions. Armed with this arsenal of evidence, I summoned Nolan home early one evening, my hands trembling as I laid out the incriminating materials on the kitchen table. When he walked through the door, his brow furrowed at the sight before him. Bree, what's going on? I took a deep breath, steadying myself. You know exactly what's going on, Nolan. Or should I say, you and Cora know what's going on. His face paled, his eyes flickering towards the damning evidence. I don't know what you're talking about. Don't insult my intelligence, I snapped, my voice rising. I have proof of your affair. The late nights, the unexplained expenses, the cozy dinners and hotel trysts. It's all right here. Nolan's shoulders slumped, and he sank into a chair, burying his face in his hands. Brielle, I'm so sorry. Sorry? I scoffed, shaking my head in disbelief. You're sorry? That's all you have to say after betraying me, after lying to me for who knows how long. He looked up at me, his eyes pleading. It's not that simple. We grew apart, Bree. You were always so focused on your work, and I felt neglected. Cora, she made me feel appreciated again. My hands clenched into fists at my sides. So what? That justifies cheating on me. Lying to me, to our son? Nolan's gaze dropped, shame etched across his features. No, of course not. I know I've made a terrible mistake, but I want to make things right, Bree. I still love you. I laughed bitterly, the sound harsh and grating. Love me? You have a twisted way of showing it, Nolan. As I stared at the man before me, the one I had once trusted implicitly, I felt a steely resolve settle over me. This was not the end, not by a long shot. Nolan would pay for his betrayal, for the pain and humiliation he had inflicted upon me and our family. And I would be the one to make him suffer the consequences of his actions. In the days following my confrontation with Nolan, a cold determination settled over me. I would not be the scorned wife, meekly accepting his betrayal and moving on. No, Nolan would face the full consequences of his actions, and I would be the one to ensure it happened. My first step was to consult with a lawyer, a shark in a tailored suit, recommended by a friend who had gone through an ugly divorce herself. As I laid out the evidence of Nolan's affair and financial misdeeds, her eyes gleamed with a predatory hunger. We're going to bleed him dry, she assured me, a savage grin spreading across her face. He won't know what hit him. With her guidance, I began meticulously documenting every transaction, every shred of proof that could be used against Nolan. Late nights were spent poring over bank statements and credit card bills, tracking the money he had funneled away to support his dalliances with Cora. Nolan, oblivious to the storm brewing, continued with his routine, working late, spinning his lies, and no doubt reassuring his mistress that everything would be fine. Little did he know, the ground was crumbling beneath his feet. In the meantime, I took steps to protect myself and Theo. Quietly, I began siphoning funds into a separate account, squirreling away a nest egg for when the inevitable fallout occurred. I knew Nolan would try to retaliate, to punish me for exposing his deceit, but I would be ready. Elise, my ever-loyal friend, was a constant source of support during this time. Over coffee and tear-stained tissues, she listened as I poured out my rage and anguish, offering a steady shoulder to lean on. "You're doing the right thing, Bree," she assured me, her eyes fierce with determination. "That bastard deserves everything that's coming to him." With each passing day, my resolve only grew stronger. I was a woman possessed, driven by a burning desire for justice and retribution. Nolan had betrayed me in the most intimate way possible, and he would pay dearly for that transgression. The final piece fell into place when I secured copies of Nolan's employment contract and company policy documents. Hidden amongst the legalese was a clause explicitly prohibiting misuse of company resources for personal gain, a violation that could result in termination. A slow, savage smile spread across my face as I realized the devastating implications. Not only would Nolan face the consequences of his actions in our personal lives, but his professional world was about to come crashing down as well. With the evidence compiled and my ducks in a row, I felt a sense of grim satisfaction. Nolan had made his bed, and now it was time for him to lie in it. The only question remaining was how far I would go to ensure his rightful punishment was carried out. And the answer? As far as it took. It was the annual Newland family gathering, an event Nolan and I used to look forward to each year. A chance to reconnect with relatives, share stories, and bask in the warmth of familial love. This year, however, the atmosphere was charged with a palpable tension. Nolan kept shooting furtive glances in my direction, no doubt sensing the storm brewing beneath my calm exterior. As the evening progressed, I bided my time, making small talk and laughing at the appropriate moments. All the while, I could feel the weight of the evidence burning in my purse, a ticking time bomb waiting to detonate. Finally, as dessert was being served, I couldn't contain it any longer. I stood, my chair scraping against the hardwood floor, and cleared my throat loudly. "If I could have everyone's attention, please," I announced, my voice steady despite the hammering of my heart. Conversation died down, and all eyes turned towards me. A mixture of curiosity and concern etched on their faces. "I have something I need to share with all of you," I continued, tugging the manila envelope from my purse. "Something that concerns my husband, Nolan." Nolan's face drained of color, his knuckles whitening as he gripped the edge of the table. "Brielle, what are you doing?" he hissed. I ignored him, pulling out the stack of photographs and spreading them across the table. "These are just a few examples of the evidence I've gathered, proving that Nolan has been engaged in a long-term affair with another woman." Gasps rippled through the room, and I heard my mother-in-law let out a strangled cry. Nolan's siblings leaned in, their expressions ranging from shock to disgust. "It gets worse," I pressed on, my voice gaining strength with each word. "Not only has Nolan been unfaithful, but he's also been siphoning money from our joint accounts to fund his escapades with this woman." I produced the bank statements and receipts, laying them out alongside the damning photographs. "Brielle, please," Nolan pleaded, his face ashen. "This isn't the place." "No, this is exactly the place," I snapped, rounding on him. "You made your choices, Nolan. Choices that betrayed our vows, our family. Now it's time for you to face the consequences in front of everyone who knows us." Silence hung heavy in the air, punctuated only by the occasional sniffle or muffled sob. Nolan's head was bowed, his shoulders slumped in defeat. But I wasn't done yet. "There's one more thing," I said, pulling out the final document, the copy of Nolan's employment contract. "According to this, your actions constitute a gross misuse of company resources, which is grounds for immediate termination." Nolan's head snapped up, his eyes wide with horror. "No, you can't." "I can, and I will," I said, my voice laced with steel. "You've left me no choice, Nolan. You brought this upon yourself." With that, I gathered my belongings and made my way towards the door, pausing only to look back at the shattered remains of my once happy family. "I hope it was worth it," I spat, before turning on my heel and walking away, leaving Nolan to face the fallout of his betrayal head-on. The days following the family gathering were a whirlwind of activity. Nolan's betrayal had been laid bare for all to see, and the consequences were swift and merciless. I wasted no time in filing for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences and infidelity as the grounds. My lawyer, ever the shark, ensured that the proceedings moved swiftly, leaving Nolan little room to maneuver. "He's finished," she assured me, a predatory gleam in her eye. "We're going to take him for everything he's worth," and take him we did. With the evidence of his affair and financial misdeeds, I was able to secure a favorable settlement, full custody of Theo, the house, and a sizable portion of our assets. Nolan, for his part, seemed resigned to his fate. The once confident man was reduced to a shell of his former self, his arrogance replaced by a haunted, hollow look. "Brielle, please," he begged during one of our meetings with the lawyers, "can't we try to work things out for Theo's sake?" I fixed him with a cold, steely gaze. "You should have thought about Theo before you decided to betray us. This is the bed you made, Nolan. Now lie in it." My words seemed to strike him like a physical blow, and he slumped back in his chair, defeated. But the true coup de grace was yet to come. With the divorce proceedings underway, I turned my attention to Nolan's professional life. Armed with the evidence of his misuse of company resources, I reached out to his firm's HR department, ensuring that the appropriate parties were made aware of his transgressions. Within days, the hammer dropped. Nolan was summoned to a meeting with his superiors, where he was confronted with the damning evidence of his affair and the financial trail leading back to the company. According to a friend who worked there, the confrontation was brutal, with Nolan's once-respected reputation lying in tatters. In the end, he was given an ultimatum: resign immediately or face termination and potential legal action. Nolan, his pride in shreds, had no choice but to tender his resignation. The news spread like wildfire through our social circles and professional networks. Whispers and sidelong glances followed Nolan wherever he went, his name tainted by the scandal of his own making. As for Cora, the woman at the center of the storm, she too faced consequences. Her involvement with a married man and the misuse of company resources that entailed cost her own job and reputation. In the blink of an eye, the lives they had so carelessly betrayed me to build together came crashing down around them. And through it all, I remained steadfast, ensuring that Nolan's transgressions were laid bare for all to see. He had made his choices, and now he would pay the price, in full and with interest. It was a harsh lesson, but one that he had brought upon himself. And as I watched him grapple with the fallout, a part of me felt a grim sense of satisfaction. Justice, it seemed, had finally been served. The dust had finally settled, and the divorce was finalized. As I stood in the courtroom, listening to the judge's ruling, a sense of relief washed over me. The nightmare was over, and I had emerged victorious. Full custody of Theo, the house, and a substantial portion of our assets. It was more than I could have hoped for. Nolan, on the other hand, was left with little more than the tattered remnants of his once promising career and a mountain of debt. As we exited the courthouse, Elise was waiting for me, her face beaming with pride. "You did it, Bree," she exclaimed, pulling me into a tight embrace. "That bastard got exactly what he deserved." I nodded, my throat tightening with emotion. It's over, finally. In the weeks that followed, I focused on rebuilding my life, piece by piece. With Nolan's financial support, I was able to quit my job and take some much-needed time off, allowing me to be there for Theo in a way I hadn't been able to before. My son, bless his heart, seemed to be handling the upheaval remarkably well. He was too young to fully grasp the complexities of what had transpired, but he knew that his father's absence was a result of his own actions. "Daddy made some bad choices," he said to me one day, his brow furrowed in childlike contemplation. "But you're here for me, Mom. That's what matters." Those words, spoken with such innocent wisdom, filled me with a sense of pride and determination. I had fought tooth and nail to protect my family, to ensure that Nolan's betrayal didn't rob Theo of the stability and love he deserved. And now, as I looked towards the future, I saw a world of possibilities opening up before us. With the financial settlement and the weight of Nolan's betrayal lifted from my shoulders, I felt a newfound sense of freedom, a liberation from the shackles of my past. No longer was I the dutiful wife, blindly trusting and turning a blind eye to the harsh realities around me. I was a survivor, a fighter, a woman who had stared down adversity and emerged stronger for it. In the months that followed, I secured a new job, one that allowed me the flexibility to be present for Theo while still pursuing my own ambitions. It was a fresh start, a clean slate, and I embraced it wholeheartedly. As for Nolan, his life had crumbled around him, the consequences of his actions too severe to brush aside. From what I heard through the grapevine, he had been forced to take a menial job, his once promising career in ruins. Cora, too, had disappeared from the picture, her own reputation tarnished by the scandal. A part of me felt a twinge of pity for them, but it was quickly overshadowed by a sense of vindication. They had made their choices, and now they were living with the fallout. As I looked back on the tumultuous journey that had brought me to this point, I realized that I had emerged not just victorious, but transformed. The naive, trusting woman I had once been was gone, replaced by a fierce, self-assured version of myself. I was no longer a victim, but a survivor, a role model for my son and a testament to the power of perseverance in the face of adversity. And as I looked towards the future, I knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, I would face them head-on, armed with the strength and resilience that had carried me through my darkest days. The path ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear. I was in control of my own destiny, and nothing would ever shake that foundation again.